Elara Vance looked at the briefing slate on her desk and felt the distinct, sinking sensation of being handed a live grenade. The grenade, in this case, was elegantly packaged in the gold-leafed folder of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, but its potential for catastrophic detonation was just as real. File Jacril Imperium vs. Lumeni. Concord subject, the Azure Transit Incident assigned mediator, Attaché Elara Vance. It's a joke, right? She said to the empty air of her office on Citadel Prime, the bustling nexus of galactic politics. Her boss, Ambassador Thorn, appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of weary resignation. He was a man who had seen 3 galactic cycles of political maneuvering and had the cynical demeanor to prove it. I assure you, Elara, it is not. The High Council requires a neutral party to make a final attempt at mediation. We, as the galaxy's most earnest and least threatening newcomers, drew the short straw. The Jacril want the Lumeni to halt all technological progress for 500 years, Elara read aloud, her voice dripping with disbelief. And the Lumeni's counteroffer is a 400-page dissertation proving their logical innocence. Thorn, this isn't a dispute, it's a cultural brick wall. They'll be at war in a month. That is the consensus, Thorn agreed, stepping inside and slumping into a visitor's chair. Which is why you're being sent. It's a sacrificial lamb mission, my dear. We send our brightest young specialist in xeno-anthropological conflict resolution. He said the words with the verbal equivalent of an eye roll. And when you fail, as you inevitably will, no one can accuse humanity of not trying its best. It's politics. Elara felt a familiar flash of irritation. Her field of study was constantly dismissed as fluff by the old guard, who believed treaties were forged with resource trades and fleet deployments, not by understanding an alien species' poetry. She was a descendant of the famed captain, Kalen Vance, a man who had averted a war with empathy, yet the diplomatic corps still seemed to believe that was a one-off fluke. The conflict itself was absurd. A Lumeni deep space probe, traveling through a charted empty corridor, had passed near a star. The Jacril, a species of silicon-based geode beings, claimed to have been silently observing that star for 10,000 years, waiting for a specific crystal to form in its core. The probe's warp passage, they claimed, had perturbed the star's magnetic field, delaying the process by 5 centuries. It was, by any rational measure, trivial. But the Jacril valued patience and tradition above all else. To them, it was the desecration of a masterpiece. The Lumeni, beings of pure logic inhabiting crystalline suits, had analyzed the data and concluded they had no legal culpability. For either side to back down would be to betray their very nature. So you want me to fail gracefully, Elara said, her eyes scanning the file again. Precisely, Thorn said. Take the ship, the Quill. Meet with them both. Listen patiently. File a report that says irreconcilable differences. We'll leak it to the Galactic News Network. Everyone will praise our diligence, and then we'll all watch the fireworks. Elara looked from Thorn's cynical face to the file. She saw the details the ambassador was ignoring. She saw the Jacril description of the star not as a resource, but as a symphony in waiting. She saw the Lumeni's obsessive internal rankings of elegantly solved problems. The old guard saw a legal impasse. Elara saw a clash of egos. I accept the assignment, she said, her voice firm. Thorn blinked, surprised. He'd expected an argument. Very well. Don't say I didn't warn you. He left, and Elara was alone with the grenade. She pulled up the cultural archives for both species, bypassing the mountains of legal and military history. She didn't need to know how they fought. She needed to know what made them proud. She began to read, not about their laws, but about their art. The Jacril Imperium's designated embassy was a barren moon, sculpted over millennia by micrometeoroid impacts. The Quill landed on a perfectly flat obsidian plain that hummed with a low, resonant frequency. Elara, dressed in a formal diplomatic jumpsuit, was escorted by silent, floating crystal shards into the heart of the moon. The meeting chamber was a vast geode cavern, its walls lined with colossal purple crystals that pulsed with soft light. Her interviewee was the emissary, a being named Tome of Ages Past. It was a 20-foot-tall cluster of smoky quartz, ambulatory on thick, crystalline legs that moved with geological slowness. Communication was not verbal, but tonal. Her universal translator rendered the resonant frequencies into crisp, formal speech. Attaché Vance of Terra. The emissary's translated voice echoed in her mind. You have come to hear the precedent of our grievance. I have come to understand it, emissary, Elara replied, choosing her words with care. She knew a direct argument was useless. The patience your people demonstrated, 10 millennia of observation, is a feat few in the galaxy can comprehend. It is an art form. A low, pleased hum emanated from the emissary. Affirmation. The great work is the pinnacle of the virtue of patience. Our grievance is immutable, the emissary continued. The Lumeni in their haste have shattered a symphony. A period of 500 years of stillness is the only fitting compensation. It is the precedent set by the sundering of the first moon, 1.2 million cycles ago. The law is the law. Elara spent an hour listening. Every attempt she made to suggest alternative compensation, resources, technology, territory, was met with the same immovable statement. It is not the precedent. It was like negotiating with a mountain. She left the moon with a headache and a profound sense of futility. Her next stop was a Lumeni light station, a structure of pure, woven energy that hung in the void like a spiderweb of captured starlight. Here there was no ceremony. She was instantly teleported to a sterile white chamber. Before her floated a containment suit of flawless, transparent crystal, inside which swirled the shimmering sentient light of Nexus Logic 7. Human, Attaché Elara Vance. The Lumeni's voice was a perfectly synthesized, genderless monotone. Your presence is noted. State your logical framework for resolution. Greetings, Nexus Logic, Elara began. I am here to explore pathways to de-escalate the current dispute. The term dispute is logically inaccurate, the Lumeni replied instantly. A dispute implies a contention over a shared truth. The facts are not in contention. Fact. The stellar corridor was unclaimed. Fact. The Jacril observation was not registered with any galactic authority. Fact. Our vessel operated within all known galactic laws. Conclusion. Lumeni culpability is 0. Therefore, offering restitution would be an illogical act, a violation of our core principles. Elara tried a different tack. Beyond the logic of law, is there not a logic of coexistence? A prolonged conflict would be inefficient, a waste of energy and resources for both sides. Analysis. Correct, Nexus Logic 7 stated. However, capitulating to an illogical demand to avoid a conflict is a greater long-term inefficiency. It sets a precedent that logic can be defeated by intransigence. This is an unacceptable outcome. We have calculated the probable cost of the war against the philosophical cost of yielding. The war is the logically preferable path. This was even worse. The Jacril were bound by the past, the Lumeni by a flawless, brutal future. One was an immovable object, the other an unstoppable force. The war wasn't just likely. From their perspectives, it was necessary. She returned to the quill defeated. Thorn was right. This was a fool's errand. She had failed. The grenade was ticking. Elara sat in the Spartan quarters of the quill, the silence of deep space pressing in on her. On her main screen, she had the transcripts of both meetings displayed side by side. On the left, the resonant, booming pronouncements of Tome of Ages Past. On the right, the cold, synthesized precision of Nexus Logic 7. It was a dialogue of the deaf. She felt the heavy weight of failure. Her career, just beginning, would be forever marked by this high-profile disaster. Humanity would be seen as impotent, their well-meaning diplomacy just so much cosmic dust. Dejected, she told the ship's computer to replay the audio-visual logs, hoping to catch something, anything she had missed. She listened to the Jubilee emissary's deep hums, translated into words of law and precedent. Then she watched the swirling light of the Lumeni, its speech patterns a cascade of flawless logic. And then she saw it. It wasn't in the primary statements. It was in the periphery. When the Jubilee emissary spoke of its people's 10,000-year vigil, its resonant frequency shifted subtly. The translator noted it as an emotional modifier, one it struggled to define. It wasn't anger or righteousness. The closest conceptual match was pride. The pride of an artist displaying a masterpiece. They called their vigil the Great Work. They weren't angry about a delayed crystal. They were furious that their magnum opus had been smudged by a careless thumb before the grand unveiling. Then she re-examined the Lumeni's presentation. For a being of pure logic, Nexus Logic 7 spent an inordinate amount of time detailing how its race's internal network had celebrated the elegance of the proof of their innocence. They didn't just want to be right. They wanted to be seen as right. Their logical superiority was a core part of their identity. A war which they would surely win with superior tactics and technology would be the ultimate public validation of that identity. Elara leaned forward, her heart starting to beat faster. A eureka moment bloomed in her mind, a flash of insight so clear it was like a star going supernova. This conflict had nothing to do with a star, or a crystal, or a 500-year penalty. It wasn't about law or even logic. It was about saving face. The Jubilee couldn't back down because it would invalidate their most sacred cultural virtue, patience. The Lumeni couldn't back down because it would violate their most sacred cultural virtue, logic. They were both trapped by the need to have their defining trait publicly affirmed. They didn't need a compromise. They needed a stage. Elara shoved. The legal files and treaty drafts aside, they were useless. This wasn't a problem for a lawyer, it was a problem for a public relations agent. A showman. She began to type, a completely new document taking shape on her screen. It wasn't a treaty. It wasn't a legal motion. It was an event proposal, a script for a grand piece of galactic theater. She smiled, the first genuine smile she'd had in weeks. The grenade wasn't a weapon. It was a firework, waiting for the right fuse. She titled the document, The Galactic Jubilee of Stellar Metamorphosis. Elara sent out a single, Priority 1 request, an immediate simultaneous Ansible conference with both Tome of Ages Past and Nexus Logic 7. It was an audacious move for a junior attaché, but desperation, she reasoned, was the mother of audacity. To her surprise, they both accepted. She sat alone on the bridge of the quill, facing two holographic representations, the towering silent geode of the Jubilee and the shimmering crystalline suit of the Lumeni. Emissary, Nexus Logic, she began, her voice betraying none of her nervousness. I am not here to offer a compromise. Compromise is insufficient for matters of core principle. I am here to propose a new framework, one that results in a superior outcome for both your peoples. The Lumeni hologram flickered. Define superior outcome. The Jubilee emissary simply resonated a low, questioning hum. I propose we recontextualize the Azure Transit incident, Elara said, launching into her carefully prepared script. It was not an act of desecration. It was an act of discovery. She turned her attention to the Jubilee. Emissary, for 10,000 years, your people watched. Your patience is, as I have said, a work of art. But the Lumeni probe, with its advanced sensors, did not damage your work. It revealed a subtle flaw within the star itself, a resonance flutter so faint that it would take a less advanced species centuries to notice. The Lumeni did not cause the delay. They were merely the first to possess the technology to detect it. The Jubilee emissary was silent, but the light pulsing within its crystal body seemed to brighten. Elara had just handed it a massive win. Their great work was so complex, only the galaxy's most advanced sensors could even perceive its nuances. Before the Lumeni could object, she turned to its hologram. Nexus Logic 7, your probe's passage and subsequent analysis was not an act of trespass. It was a diagnostic triumph. It uncovered a fundamental stellar instability. A war would prove your tactical superiority, yes, but that is a crude tool. What if instead, you could demonstrate your technological and intellectual superiority on a galactic stage by fixing a star? Nexus Logic 7's swirling light form spun faster. Elaborate. I present the Galactic Jubilee of Stellar Metamorphosis, Elara announced, a joint project of public spectacle. The Lumeni Concord, in a grand gesture of its peerless technological mastery, will design and construct a hyper-resonance generator to correct the stellar flaw and accelerate the crystal's formation. A feat no other race could accomplish. She paused, then looked back at the Jacril. And they will do this guided by the Jacril Imperium, whose unparalleled generational wisdom and 10 millennia of collected data are the only key to making the project possible. You will not be compensated with a penalty. You will be celebrated as the essential sages without whom this grand scientific undertaking could not be conceived. She let the proposal hang in the air. She had offered them both everything they truly wanted. The Jacril's patience was now legendary wisdom. The Lumeni's technology was now a force for cosmic creation. And most importantly, in her carefully constructed narrative, neither side had to apologize. Neither side had to admit fault. Neither side lost. They both won. Bigger than they ever could have in a war. The silence that followed was the longest minute of Elara's life. The silence stretched from 1 minute to 10, to an hour. On the bridge of the quill, Elara could do nothing but wait, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. This was the moment. Her plan was either the most brilliant diplomatic maneuver in a century or the most spectacular failure. There was no middle ground. Finally, the Jacril emissary, tome of ages past, moved. It took a slow, grinding step forward, and a complex series of resonant frequencies filled the air. Elara's translator struggled for a moment before the words resolved on her screen. The proposed framework recontextualizes the past event without invalidating the sanctity of the great work. It magnifies the significance of our patience, elevating it from a vigil to an essential act of cosmic stewardship. This outcome preserves precedent while achieving a result of greater magnitude. It is acceptable. Elara's breath hitched. One down. She turned her gaze to the shimmering form of Nexus Logic 7. The energy being had been perfectly still, its internal light swirling in complex analytical patterns. Its synthesized voice broke the silence as crisp and precise as ever. Analysis complete. The Jubilee scenario offers a net positive outcome. 1. It avoids resource expenditure on inefficient warfare. 2. It provides an unparalleled public forum to demonstrate Lumeni technological supremacy. 3. The challenge of stellar resonance correction is a logically stimulating problem that will accelerate our own scientific progress. 4. It reframes a potential liability into a showcase of capability. The logic is sound. A single final sentence flashed on the screen from the Lumeni. We concur. Elara Vance nearly fell out of her chair. She had done it. She had taken 2 empires on an irreversible collision course for war and turned them into partners. The news hit Citadel Prime like a shockwave. When Elara transmitted the joint communique announcing not a truce but the Galactic Jubilee of Stellar Metamorphosis, Ambassador Thorne had to read it 3 times before he believed it. The GNN headline wasn't War Averted by Terran, Diplomat, but rather, in unprecedented move, ancient rivals Jacril and Lumeni announced joint scientific mega-project brokered by humanity. Overnight, humanity's reputation changed. They were no longer the earnest, slightly naive newcomers. They were the architects of the impossible peace. The other great powers, who had been placing bets on how long the war would last, were now looking at the Terran diplomatic corps with a mixture of awe and suspicion. How had they done it? Elara, floating alone in the quiet of her ship, knew the secret. She hadn't used threats. She hadn't used logic or law in the way her opponents understood it. She had used a uniquely human tool, the deep, intuitive understanding. that for most intelligent beings, the greatest driving force in the universe isn't greed or hatred, it's pride. Weeks later, Elara stood on the observation deck of a neutral vessel, the designated auditor of the new Accord. The view outside was breathtaking. Where two war fleets should have been tearing each other apart with plasma and kinetic strikes, there was now a dance of creation. The Lumeni had outdone themselves. Their contribution, the stellar resonance generator, was a thing of impossible beauty and scale. It was a vast ring of woven light and crystal, miles in diameter, assembled in deep space by a silent ballet of robotic drones. It surrounded the star at a careful distance, shimmering like a halo. The Jubilee fleet was just as impressive. Their massive geode-like ships were not armed for battle, but bristled with sensor arrays and deep space transmitters. They moved, with a slow, deliberate grace, taking up precise positions as dictated by their ancient calculations. They were the conductors of this stellar orchestra. Elara was an honored guest, a status that still felt surreal. She had been joined by both Tome of Ages Past and Nexus Logic 7, who had arrived in person to oversee the inauguration. The preliminary harmonics are aligned. Attaché Vance. Nexus Logic 7's voice came from a nearby communications node. The Lumeni had already granted her a direct feed to their analytical data, an unprecedented gesture of trust. The Jubilee calculations have proven to be flawlessly precise. From her other side, a low, pleased hum resonated from the Jubilee emissary. It extended a crystalline manipulator arm and offered her a small, perfectly formed shard of amethyst, a token, formed by the resonance of our home moon. It signifies a debt of perspective. Elara accepted the gift, humbled. It was a token of immense respect from a species that measured time in eons. Then, the moment arrived. On a coordinated signal, the Lumeni generator activated. A wave of pure, harmonious energy, visible as a soft ripple of golden light, washed over the star. It was a chord struck on a cosmic scale, tuned with Jubilee wisdom and powered by Lumeni genius. Deep within the star's core, the magnetic fields began to shift, to realign. The subtle flaw was being corrected. The crystal, the object of the entire dispute, would now form faster and more perfectly than ever before. The former enemies were now partners, their emissaries standing side by side, engrossed in the data streams of their new shared purpose. The air was thick, not with the tension of war, but with the thrill of discovery. Elara watched, realizing she hadn't just stopped a war, she had replaced it with something better. Elara Vance returned to Citadel Prime not as a sacrificial lamb, but as a conquering hero. Her tiny office had been replaced with a spacious one overlooking the station's Grand Concourse. The field of xeno-anthropological conflict resolution, once a dismissive joke, was now the most talked about and heavily funded department in the entire Terran diplomatic corps. Ambassador Thorne greeted her not with cynicism, but with a look of genuine awe. "I've been in this business for 60 years, Elara," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "I've seen wars started over stolen minerals and broken treaties. I have never ever seen a war stopped with a party invitation." He slid a data slate across her new polished desk. It was a promotion, a senior position, with a mandate to build a whole team based on her methods. "It seems your fluff has teeth after all," he admitted. She accepted, of course. Later, that day, sitting in her new office, she looked out at the endless river of alien species flowing through the concourse below. The galaxy was a chaotic, beautiful, and deeply illogical place. The ancient races, hidebound by millennia of tradition and rigid thinking, were constantly stumbling into conflicts of their own making. They were masters of technology and war, but they were amateurs when it came to understanding each other. Humanity, the newcomers, the galactic toddlers, had a unique advantage. They weren't the strongest or the smartest or the most logical, but they came from a world of bafflingly complex social structures. They understood irrationality. They understood pride, honor, shame, and the desperate universal need to save face. They understood that how a story is told is often more important than the facts of the story itself. A new message pinged on her console. It was a high-priority request from the Galactic Council. 2 avian species, the Fennec Sovereignty and the Clade of Harak, were on the brink of war over a dispute concerning the proper poetic interpretation of a shared ancestral epic. The Council was formally requesting a human mediator. Elara smiled. It was an absurd, impossible problem. It was a grenade of pride and prejudice, ready to explode, and she knew just how to defuse it. Humanity had found its niche. They weren't the galaxy's warriors or its engineers. They were its storytellers, its social engineers, its essential, invaluable arbitrators who knew that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't a supernova, but the quiet, desperate need to look good.